Hello everyone. For our notes today, we are going to be exploring the senses. Let's start with a couple of definitions. So first, a sense is a way for an organism to gather information about their environment and respond to a stimulus. So it's a way that we interact with our environment and we react to our environment as well. A stimulus is anything that makes an organism or part of an organism respond in some way. So a really obvious stimulus would be if I were to put my hand on a hot stove, my body's going to get the signal that my hand is burning. I'm going to pull my hand away. The stimulus is the hot stove, which is a temperature, and the reaction is to pull my hand away. Maybe a much more subtle stimulus is if light hits the retina in the back of your eye, it sends an electrical signal to your brain to interpret the image. So that's not one where the entire body necessarily responds, but the eye and the brain respond to that stimulus. Next, let's explore the difference between a sense and a reflex. Because when we react to senses and we react to reflexes, it's done differently. So in humans, senses are processed in the brain. Whatever sense it is, sight, touch, taste, smell, it is processed in the brain. A stimulus that causes a reflex is not processed in the brain. It's actually processed lower on in the spinal cord. And it doesn't require any brain activity. And this is really bizarre because there is a condition that's known as a beating heart cadaver. So the person is brain dead. They are clinically, and by every measure of the word, they are dead. But their heart continues to beat. The heart can be independently of the brain, and their reflexes still work. So if there's a really loud noise, their eyes might turn towards that noise. If you were to tap their patellar tendon, their leg will twitch. Like their reflexes remain intact, even though their brain is dead, and that's because reflexes are not processed in the brain. Senses are. Next section of our notes here is titled The Five, and then I've crossed that out and changed it to the six senses. It's not talked about much, but there really is a sixth sense that our bodies have. It's not some mystical or magical sense. It's one that is critically important to everything we do in our lives. So we're going to talk about all six of those senses. We're going to start by just saying what the sense is. We're going to say what the stimulus modality is. And all this means is, what is the stimulus that causes that sense to react? And then what organs are involved. So what is the sense organ for that actual sense? So we'll start with sight. Well, the stimulus modality for sight is light. If you want to put the actual particle of light, it would be a photon. But either way, it is light that triggers our sight. If there's a complete absence of light, like if you're in a deep cave, there's truly no light, we don't see. We have nothing to process. And of course, the sense organ involved here is the eyes. And the most important part of the eye is the retina. So the retina contains the cells that actually respond to those light waves and then send it to the brain. Next up is smell. The stimulus modality here is actually chemicals. So the way that we smell is chemicals floating through the air get into our nose and bind to different receptors in our nose, and that tells us what the smell should be. So chemicals floating through the air give us that smell, and that is our nose. These cells are held within the nose. Taste is actually the same. Chemicals are also a big part of taste, and smell is actually critical to taste as well. So chemicals, we could put molecules, that's fine too. You guys have probably noticed if you ever have a cold and your nose is completely clogged up and you can't smell, foods don't taste nearly as strong either. A lot of what we taste actually comes from our sense of smell, and our taste organ is the tongue. Next up is hearing. The stimulus modality for hearing is pressure waves in the air or whatever medium. We can hear through water. We can hear as sound waves are traveling through solid objects. But whatever that sound wave is traveling through, it's a pressure waves. It pushes on and then pulls against the air or the water or whatever it's moving through. And those sound waves, those pressure waves hit our eardrum. It's literally just a thin membrane that vibrates when those pressure waves hit it, and it sends that information to the brain to be detected as sound. So our sense organ here is the cochlea. It's a part of your ear, but then the eardrum is really, really important as well. It's just not an entire organ. And the actual name for an eardrum is awesome. It's called the tympanic membrane. It's the actual name for an eardrum. Next is touch. The stimulus modality for touch is pressure. Anytime you touch against something, it causes pressure against whatever it is that you're touching, and then that responds to the nerves in that region respond to the pressure and send that information to the brain. Touch also composes temperature as well. So all of the temperature sensing nerves that we have are in our skin, and that is the organ. So the organ for touch is the skin. And that brings us to this sixth sense that we never really talk about, but it's arguably the most important of all of them. I would argue that if you lost this sense, your life would be more negatively impacted than any of the others. And in some very, very rare occasions, people actually have lost this sense, and they really can't function very well as humans anymore because it's that important. And this sense is called proprioception. It's a long word, proprioception. And what proprioception is the sense of where we are. Sense of where we are. For example, if I asked you, go ahead and try this. I want you to close both your eyes, hold your arm out, and then try and touch your hand with your other arm. And you will know where your arm is even without looking. Alternatively, you can close your eyes and take your index finger and touch your nose, because even without looking, you know where your nose is. You have this sense of where all your limbs are, where your hands are in space, even without looking. That is proprioception. The stimulus modality for this is actually muscle stretch. If you want to, like your bicep right on the top of your arm, if I hold my arm straight, my bicep is actually longer. It is stretched out. And when I bend my arm up, the bicep shortens. It thickens because it's shortening, so it has to get thicker, but it literally shortens. And your proprioception is aware of how long or short that muscle is. The muscle on the opposite side, your tricep, does the opposite. As my bicep shortens, my tricep lengthens. So that proprioception can look at the balance between the bend of my bicep and tricep, how much they're stretched, and it can tell me where my arm is positioned. Same with your shoulder muscles and every other muscle group. Through how much they're stretched or contracted, we know where our bodies are in space. And people who lose proprioception, their arms and legs will just wander aimlessly when they're not looking at them, because they just don't know where they are. And if they, to even walk, they have to look at their legs, and they have to make sure they're looking at their arms, or else they don't know where their limbs are and they just fall to the ground. It's a really serious condition. It's probably the most important sense, but it's the least talked about. So since it's the muscles that are stretching that is our stimulus modality, the sensory organ must be muscles. So those are our six senses, and you will get to explore some of those a bit further in a lab, and then you'll also learn about the neurons, which are the cells that carries this sensory information to our brains. As always, thanks for watching.